Salad or Dolly, threw a great party. We all drank Bacardi, it got kinda gnarly. We're light as a feather, we're tougher than leather. Together we're weirder together.
Ione Skye.
Benjamin Michael Lee.
How are you doing?
I'm pretty good.
In this troubled world we live in, full of, every day a different sort of tragedy and disaster.
Yeah.
We root our joy in the things we love and are passionate about. And that's really what keeps us going, right?
Yeah.
It's like some levity, some fandom.
Yes.
Yes. And we took a little journey over probably the last 6 months, a journey of fandom.
Yeah.
With our friend Jenny Eliscu. And we welcome her here today to discuss the travails, the Don Quixote-esque journey of a podcast we attempted to make. Jenny, you probably know as like legendary indie rock alternative journalist. I'm thinking I know there was a whole trajectory before Spin, but that was like a core era of your influence, and then SiriusXMU, and you are an authority on all things bubbling slightly to the left of center.
Thank you.
And host of the Eliscu podcast and just general music legend. Welcome to Weirder Together.
Thank you. I love seeing how it all happens. It's great to be here.
Yeah, seeing how the sausage is made.
Exactly.
Gross.
Thanks for having me. I was thinking on my way over here about our very tilting at windmills kind of journey together, which it's crazy. It's been almost a year since we first started talking about.
And I say ill-fated, but I think the job of a lifetime career in show business is that nothing's ill-fated, because ultimately this conversation is coming out of something we tried to make. So perhaps, you never know exactly what form ideas are going to land in, and
Totally.
maybe this was the form. Maybe we did almost a year of dialogue and research to have one podcast episode that we'll make no money out of.
Worth it. Totally worth it.
Yeah.
So let's go back to the beginning of this particular story.
Yeah, the beginning of this particular story is December of 2022.
Oh, grounding it in actual dates. I love this is the journalist in you. That's why we need you here right now.
December of 2022, the subject of our fascination, one Mr. Jonathan Richman, played a residency here in LA at Zebulon that, many of our friends attended over the course of, I think it was like 5 shows, myself included. I'd seen Jonathan play in New York a couple of times at bigger venues, Bowery Ballroom, and, have been a huge fan and loved it. There was something just extra special and magical about Zebulon, which is more like a cabaret environment, and the stage is really low and you're just really right there. He stepped off the stage and he was right next to me. Really the ideal Jonathan experience. And I posted something on Instagram just about enthusing about it, and someone who follows me wrote back and had this story about living in, sort of the vicinity where Jonathan lives currently up in Northern California, and living in that town, and how if you live there, you sometimes see Jonathan just bouncing down the street, just singing a song or something, and, he'll wave hey, or he'll be sitting at the popcorn stand at the local movie theater or whatever. I reposted that and got some other folks chipping in with some stories, and we, who have known each other for years, kind of began our first really meaningful engagement and friendship with each other.
Yes. Jonathan brought us
through this and through the idea. And I have to say, even if this is the only thing we make,
yes,
here we are. This is awesome. But also, it was your sort of energy toward, there's something. Yes, we love Jonathan too, and there's something there.
Well, I remember right then, I think I did a tweet that was, is someone going to make a Jonathan Richman documentary? And Michael McKean retweeted it. And it's and you started realizing wow, there are all these people who are huge fans. We have these seminal lifetime experiences with Jonathan Richman. Now, I think we should give a little background to who Jonathan is, because not everybody is as fluent in the lore of Jonathan Richman. I mean, let's give broad strokes.
I mean, Jonathan Richman is one of the ultimate outsider artists, a singer-songwriter, best known as the leader of the Modern Lovers, which, certainly have reached that status where even if you're a kid on streaming platform X, you probably will stumble across Modern Lovers at some point, or you've seen their logo, or their...
And basically one album, right? Basically. And then the Modern Lovers had Jerry Harrison, who went on to be in Talking Heads, and this record, the Sex Pistols covered Roadrunner. So we're talking about like the Modern Lovers were like the proto-punk band.
I know they started 70, what year about?
They started in 70, 71.
So long ago.
So long ago.
One of those bands where you're just sort of like, think it's later because they kind of fit in this, this world where it's not like, I remember being surprised, like, wow, that was earlier than I thought.
It's almost like a hippie era they're in, but they were like, so when were the Velvet Underground?
Well, the thing is that the Velvet Underground only started a little before the Modern Lovers, and I feel like I've noticed this a lot over the years, that like a great new band will be influenced by a band just ever so slightly older than them, because if you're young people in your teens, you probably are excited about a band that's in their later teens or in their 20s. So then as time passes, they seem to get closer and closer together. But Jonathan Richman before Modern Lovers was a Velvet Underground super fan. He was there, and Sterling Morrison once said, like, if the Velvet Underground had a protege, it was Jonathan. It was the first band he heard that he loved. He had a Fugs album. He traded his friend for the View and Nico album, and he was obsessed with them as like his personal brand as like a kid.
And you know what's so weird about it? That a lot of artists who are influenced by the Velvets, what they love about it is like the seediness and this sort of like darker edge of it. Whereas Jonathan seemed to have no interest in that, but he loved just the rawness and the honesty and the fact that like it was DIY and it was like empowering. Like you never heard him referencing like, oh, it was great hearing people sing about heroin, or, which is what a lot of like people get caught up in with Velvet Underground.
Yeah, I think it was, my understanding, and I referenced to an extent this book, the only Jonathan Richman biography I've been able to find by writer Tim Mitchell. That's it there. And it's great. So a lot of what I know comes from there, that the spirit of the Velvet Underground's music is what Jonathan grew up hearing a lot of the 60s music of his generation, but that was sort of the inciting moment. And then I think it was his interpretation of that spirit that's been, what's carried his music forward ever since, which is just much more earnest and like just sincerity.
Well, he got really like anti-volume. He basically like the way he interpreted being punk was he quietened way down and he started making music. He liked playing in old age homes and preschools, and his music sometimes would sound like kids' music, but it also was like, it was for grown-ups.
Yeah, I mean, when you think of artists from now who sound like Jonathan Richman or are influenced by Jonathan Richman, like who do you think of? Like our friend Adam Green, certainly at the forefront, or I guess maybe even like a David Berman in a way, but
those are also more intellectual. I kind of also think of like the playfulness that, especially went into like K Records and all that kind of stuff, the indie stuff that was like what you'd call twee. I think really like
low register twee.
Oh yeah, Calvin Johnson being like with the big balls but very gentle. But yeah, like I think that whole sense of where music became indie rock and punk became playful was really like the Jonathan Richman lineage.
Yeah, his commentary on life, and it doesn't feel angry, but the way he feels about the world. And it's such a great tone, because obviously he's so about like beautiful things and, affection and all these kind of beautiful things. But, I don't know, he's just so unique, his take on the modern world.
Yeah, there you go. So we all love his music, and we've all had different experiences going to his shows or meeting him, and we should talk about some of those experiences. But our concept was, wow, this is a guy who is notoriously press shy, right? Like, what's his policy with interviews and things
Well,
like
yeah,
that?
one little turn in it was that I reached out to the people who handle his stuff and asked if he would be on my podcast because he was here doing those shows at Zebulon, and I knew, you have to. He's never had a cell phone or a laptop. He only wants to do kind of analog stuff. So I said I can bring my little Tascam to Zebulon and we can do it there. And they wrote back and said that he would only do a radio interview or, what I interpret as an audio interview if it was first of all, set up well ahead of him being on tour, understandable, but also that it would be a live interview only, never to be rebroadcast, and you couldn't edit it up, cut it up, and use it for something else.
Wow.
And I was like, well, if I ever have that kind of a situation.
Like he'd do Good Morning America or something like that.
Or like if true college radio or local radio where they, I work at Sirius XM, we record and save everything. We can't just air something live and not keep it. But true like college radio live show, he could swing and sit down. Hey, it's Jonathan. I'm on tour, blah, 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 and get them to swear they're going to burn the tape or something. But I don't have that sort of a thing. And so that was, kind of how it became clear, like the only way to make a podcast about Jonathan Richman is without his participation. And who needs him to participate after all? If that's okay, there's plenty of ways to talk about Jonathan without Jonathan having to do something uncomfortable.
Yeah, because there's not, like, if you go on YouTube, there's some live performance, but there's not like a whole bunch of interview footage. He's really courted a certain kind of anonymity, which is interesting because he's someone who, like, the mainstream has called on at moments. His most mainstream thing was he was the narrator, the musical narrator for There's Something About Mary, because the Farrelly brothers were huge fans of his. So he's not like, we're not talking about Gigi Allen or someone who's doing something so transgressive, there's no room for them in the mainstream. He just has kept it at arm's length, like very intentionally.
Yeah, that's so a part of this whole situation that we have been in trying to do this. And, even just refreshing my memory with this great Tim Mitchell book today about his willful obsolescence, this sort of lack of desire to be perceived that, I've seen in other artists over the years, and I think it's a perennial trait, but there's such a purity of it with him. Yeah. It makes you wonder about why so very much, but it's like always been an ingredient in what he's done. For instance, he never keeps any of his recordings for more than a year. So if he records himself doing something, after a year, he destroys it.
Wow. I didn't know that.
Yeah. And if you don't know anything about Jonathan Richman, yes, get a load of this. This man has never had a computer or cell phone. He has a song called You Can Have a Cell Phone, That's Okay, but Not Me. He's not messing around.
And it's not annoying. Like some people who take these stances can rub me the wrong way. I don't know if they rub others the wrong way, or it gets a little like, I don't know, in this certain category where people who like, we only eat this food and we only live this way, and it sort of feels kind of something different.
Sort of
things.
like angry contrarian.
Yeah, or like, I don't even know. But for him, I don't know if it's just that I'm a fan, but somehow he makes it okay. Like, okay, great, you do that.
Yeah, because he's so nice. He's such a great spirit. Like everything seems to be coming from this place of gentleness and kindness and joy and authenticity. And there's no contrivance. It's just really what he loves. And it's not about him. He doesn't want to make it about him.
The conflict as a fan with that is that his music is not deliberately opaque. There's certain artists like Blue Nile or something where you could listen to that music and come out feeling you knew nothing about the creators. It's like, or even like Talk or things that are just sort of like, they create these aesthetic worlds and you go, okay, I understand you desire to live as an anonymous entity. But Jonathan, anyone who's lived through his music and it's touched them really does feel like it's a friend. And so the idea that he's so out of reach.
We're calling him Jonathan.
He's always calling himself Jonathan. In his songs, he even refers to, hey, Jonathan. People say, hey, Jonathan. His songs are so autobiographical that it is confusing that he feels comfortable sharing that stuff, but doesn't feel comfortable sharing anything else or other stuff. Or, I've wondered whether the thing about wanting things to be quiet, because that's another thing, as you mentioned, like it's key that his story involves wanting to get quieter and quieter and having like what started off as a punk band that so quickly that before they had even put out their album, he had decided that they were getting too loud. Part of what happened with their album is that it didn't come out until after they had broken up because of Jonathan having inner conflict about what they were doing and whether it was the right thing. Recording with they recorded with John Cale, they recorded with Kim Fowley, they couldn't find a manager. He didn't want to perform the repertoire from that famous album on tour, so they got dropped before the album even came out. And some of the people who've worked with him and talk about him in this book, like, talk about that being frustrating. Like they couldn't play quietly enough,
Mm-hmm.
And I'm just fascinated. I don't know if I'll ever know what he thinks about, the why of it all.
Yeah. I don't know if he wants us to know. I mean, I guess what we're saying is there could be more of a conflict because he presents himself as really, he's made decisions and this is what he wants, but he might be more conflicted than we'll ever know.
You get the sense that, but it's not like, I don't feel like with like JD Salinger, you feel like they're blocking you out. Like when I guess like, I don't know, like you feel like, oh, they don't want me in their world. But with Jonathan Richman, I don't really feel like you're blocking me out. Like it's more like there must be some complicated thing going on. I don't know about his love life, but I feel like
Yeah, I mean, he like met a woman early on in his music career, Gail, who he married and had kids with, and was with for a long time. And then I think he's been with the same woman for many, many years now since then. And yeah, his whole thing was just romantic love and wanting to have a wife and kids for, as long as he could talk about it, basically. I mean, even I was listening to Someone I Care About on the way here. It's just like, I don't want a girl just to bawl. All I want is a girl that I can care about, or I want nothing at all.
Right.
It's like he knows what he wants, and he wants that.
When sharing Jonathan Richman, like the first, people that, turn you on or whatever, it very much, even if it's a friend who did that, it is romantic. It is one of those romantic things, like listen to this, and then you hear the first whether it's Hospital or whatever the girlfriend or whatever first three songs that you and then whoever gave it to you, it becomes your romantic thing that you did together. And the sharing of Jonathan Richman is so nice.
It's some of the most romantic songwriting in popular music, I think, that's like ever, because it is so. And he talks about this. There's this. He feels like he comes from another time, essentially, and in a way, it's a bit of a fantasy time. Like that time sort of never really existed, but it's like almost a type of chivalry and romance.
Don't you love the whole New England thing? And I can also think of like the imagery, the slight imagery that comes up of the covered bridge or whatever, just like this kind of nice imagery of this world that he wants.
And now, as deep fans of Jonathan Richman, our desire was, in a sense, to work within the parameters and because we have no desire. This was not like the looking for Richard Simmons thing where we wanted to like expose him and go. It was more about, hey, we know he doesn't want to do this. Yeah. Let's leave him out of it totally.
Let's respect his boundaries.
But let's talk to everyone has these stories about him.
Yeah.
And so our idea was to compile a series based around people's experiences with Jonathan Richman, which to me felt like a good compromise. But I guess I also, I assumed he wanted compromise.
Yeah. I mean, and also it does seem, I don't know that I'm a huge fan, and so I've read more about him and like focused more on stories about him, but I haven't heard as many delightful stories about one artist as about Jonathan. I mean, even just when we were first posting about it, and someone I know had a story of, having been in Jonathan's home and describing a guest room where there's a couch with velvet rope around it and a sign that says cats only. Which is just like, how wonderful is that? Or even like in this book, there's when Modern Lovers were on Top of the Pops, Buzzcocks were on as well. And Pete Shelley told a story about Jonathan just hopping, like truly hopping up the stairs backstage, just in a world of his own, just completely oblivious to Pete Shelley walking by just for funsies or whatever. There's just these stories about him that seem like it's
so many out there.
It's so many.
Wow. I mean, he could be a cult leader. Like you'd be like, everyone live like a child, live quietly. Like I would almost go in that one.
Well, let's get into our personal stories to start with. Like, Ione, what are you've had some experiences.
I mean, I don't have that many, but I did in my early dating, I guess, like with Adam Horovitz. He was the first person to give me Jonathan Richman stuff. And then I feel like when I was friends with Sofia Coppola, we were listening. There was just a time in the 90s, and it was just such a great time. And I just personally was just listening to Jonathan Richman. And then at Sofia Coppola's wedding to Spike Jonze, Tom Waits and Jonathan Richman performed, as you have,
That's a quinceanera lineup.
and just in a Francis Ford Coppola vineyard in Napa.
It is amazing. Like, if you can get your calls returned by anyone, those are some tasteful requests.
And they each did a couple of songs?
Yeah, like Tom Waits did Outside, and then there was this sort of more interior, maybe it had, wine bottles and stuff, and Jonathan Richman did some songs.
What do you mean maybe it had wine bottles?
Well, it was like the room that Tom Waits was outdoors on a stage, and then later in the evening, Jonathan Richman it was sort of like at the end of the wedding, and it was like a very we're in a room now, it's quite a big room, but it was sort of just a room this size, and what I'm saying is it might have been a room that had wine. It felt like a dungeon type room. Cool. And not that many people
we're in the Coppola sex dungeon.
The wine and sex dungeon.
And we weren't not that many people were watching. And then I was just sort of, locked. I was just observing him.
Was he on a mic and stuff, or was he just playing in the room?
And then he just sort of looked very much like, do not talk to me, anybody. Not in a bad way, but just I did not. And I was standing by him thinking maybe he will talk to me, but he was very shy, and we didn't. But I also was not surprised. But it was just, it was just kind of a very heady, trippy thing to have happened. But yeah, you?
Yeah, my experiences were, I was a huge fan, and when I was making Breathing Tornadoes, that was the first record I made where I had sort of like a budget and Capitol. It was coming out on Grand Royal through Capitol. So I had like a label saying, what do you want? Who do you want do you want guests on the record or anything? And I was like, I'd love Jonathan Richman. And and I think they were like, okay. I ended up getting a message on my voicemail. Hey, Ben, this is Jonathan. I heard you want me and Tommy to produce your record. And I was like, God bless Jonathan Richman. He's made some of my favorite records ever. I've never gone, you know what the key is here? The production. The production of this.
But why wouldn't you say yes?
I was in the middle of making an expensive record with Ed Buller, who'd done the Psychedelic Furs and Pulp. Okay. It was like high production with strings anyway. So I called him and I talked on the phone. And it was like awkward but nice, you know? And then I met him 2 other times, once at the Something About Mary premiere, because I also had a song in that, but he had earplugs in at the party. And it was, again, I got that feeling of, he even said to me, he's like, this isn't a good place to talk. Aww. And so I didn't talk. And then later with Evan Dando, we went to see him at Irving Plaza, and Jonathan was like, hey, Evan, hey, Ben. And he was, but it was very brief, and, I don't know. That was it. It was like I was very intimidated because I loved him so much. I didn't know. There's only been a handful of people I felt like I don't know how to handle myself in these interactions, and that's one of them.
I understand the being overwhelmed by sounds and loudness and whatever that is, but but yes.
And when you think about how resistant he was to attention, Something About Mary must have been bananas.
Yeah, it's interesting too that there are a few things that he's been really very much up for over the years. And it's hard to derive any kind of, well, what is the kind of thing he might be up for. So I guess before Something About Mary, he is like in the background in scenes in Dumb and Dumber, playing. So that was sort of how they got him kind of into their world so that he could have this bigger role in There's Something About Mary. But similarly, he went on Conan multiple times. He was up for Conan. He was up for Farrelly Brothers movies. Was up for Sophia's Wedding. He's been up for, you hear about him popping up at something that's a little bit glamorous that he was up for, which is, part of the mystery of just like, oh no, he does want to be, that's the part that I don't understand. He does want to be understood, I think. There's a sense in his music and just the sort of like loneliness kind of vibe that he came from and at the aspirational, like I'm from Boston and isn't New York and the Velvet Underground cool, and of accessibility in that, or of like openness to sharing, but at the same time, these obstacles that he kind of puts up in front of himself. I mean, when you get more familiar with the history of all the different musicians who played with him over the years, them reaching a point where they were frustrated that by the limitations he was imposing, and even with love, they parted with love, but where they were like, I don't know what I'm supposed to be doing here.
Well, that's unique because so many bands, obviously, there's the drug thing where one's just going down a drug
or
road.
There's the singer who wants to be too famous.
Oh, right. Yeah, like the Police or whatever.
Yeah.
But I wonder if there's a through line with Conan and Sophia, and I'm trying to, and the Farley brothers. I'm trying to think, is there a personality type that he just responds to?
Well, I think he also does love, he loves rock and roll iconography. He loves show business.
Yeah,
I think there's a side, that's the side that's interesting. And I was also kind of like, as a musician who's, I'm in my mid-40s, I've lived through the transition from basically, analog to digital and how you navigate an income with that. I was just sort of like, we should be doing whatever we can to there's no reason a Jonathan Richman song couldn't become a massive TikTok sound. There is income that he could be earning without doing too many mainstream things hands-on. And so we were like, we could be, hey, let's get out in the trenches and put the good word forward.
Yeah.
So I think
but also just the love, just to be
to
be religious about it, and
exactly.
Just be like, I get so much of pure joy from his music, but also from these stories about him, and from however confusing they are, the choices that he makes, that I know other people would feel inspired by him, and other people have been inspired by him. And that's the thing to share, regardless of how it affects his life, is just that. And I guess I feel like, I think he does want that. I think he does want the energy that he's moved by to be shared, because these various stories about him are just so just disarming and charming in a way I've truly never heard of any other music artist who is like that so definitively.
So let's talk about some of those. Well, firstly, had you met him before that?
No, I had never met him. And at Zebulon, he, like I say, he kind of stepped off the stage. It was a little bit of a just ooh, careful, Jonathan. We were all just right there. And it was at the end of the show, and he was a little kind of confused for a minute about where to go, and he was happy. And I said, thank you. And he said, thank you. And I was like, wow, okay, I spoke to him. That was kind of easy. That was before I emailed and asked about the interview. But I've never had any encounter with him. I will say that he was in my dream last night.
Wow.
And I was walking down the street, and much like this one story I had heard, he was coming down the street in some musical. He was dancing and singing by himself. And as he walked by, I waved hello, and he waved hello back. And then I was like, he wants to dance. We're going to dance now. Me and Jonathan Richman are going to dance my dream. And we but then it got awkward. Of course it did.
Sure.
And I was like, And then he sort of danced away. And I was like, all right, that was good enough.
Wow. That was a pretty unbrand Jonathan Richman interaction in your dream.
It was.
I mean,
we were both awkward, but we loved it. And then it was over.
I'm sure everyone who knows him, not really knows him, is sort of in love with him. And it almost feels like, if you had an older brother's friend who you just know it's never going to work in a million years, but I can love you like the way a little kid loves an older person, in a way where it's not going to work, but it has that wonderful quality, because he's, beautiful as well, right, Ben?
Absolute dreamboat. Great style too.
Yeah.
Underrated his style.
Do you think? I mean, I don't know if it's
No, those stripy shirts.
No, I don't know if it's underrated. I don't know,
I don't see him on many lists of the most like influential
He
looks
still
of 2023.
looks amazing.
Yeah.
So what are some of the best stories that you'd heard about Jonathan, like when we were digging up all this stuff and talking to people?
I mean, the interesting thing is that the stories I feel like that actually reached me are the more kind of brief anecdotal ones, like the one of the couch with For Cats Only, or the person who first reached out about him singing on the street, or, little stories that popped up, artists I've talked to who were like, oh yeah, I was playing on the same bill as him, and he, came to sound check and said something like, sound check, awesome, or, just cute little things he would say in passing. And then our idea was to like really get into not just having these sweet little stories, but talking to people like Jerry Harrison and all the different people.
Our first mistake.
Like all these different people who'd worked with him over the years.
And Jerry wanted to do it, but the sense I got from his manager was he wanted to do it with Jonathan's blessing, which now knowing how intensely some of those people had felt Jonathan's blessing is like it can be withheld or it can be given, and it's often withheld.
Totally.
And he didn't want to do something that would upset Jonathan, and so he passed on it. Yeah,
right. Well, I mean, so even this Tim Mitchell book, like in the introduction, he points out that he asked Jonathan's permission to write the book, and Jonathan gave him permission, and that's how he was able to interview all of these guys, people I should say, who had played with Jonathan over the years. And some people get caught up on like a book is fine, but other media is not fine, or whatever it might be. So the idea that permission would be required, it wasn't even that surprising. And then sort of, and we really, of course, love the idea we came up with about talking to all these people, not just, people who have had passing encounters that are sweet, but whether it's like the Farrelly brothers or Jerry Harrison, all this massive list of people who've interacted with him over the years. Still a great idea for a show. At some point in recent months, I thought like, okay, we're not hearing back from Jerry Harrison. And I feel like what I remember too is that Jerry's manager indicated like, oh yeah, Jerry likes this idea.
Yeah.
Jerry likes this idea, but just wants to run it by Jonathan. Okay, totally understand. And then crickets, we weren't hearing anything.
Yeah.
And then I started thinking, oh, maybe I need to write Jonathan a letter, because I know he's written back to people's letters over the years, and maybe I need to write him a letter and just say, hey, here's our idea. We're working on this thing.
We talking snail mail? We talking
snail
email?
mail? Okay. Snail mail. Yeah, that's the only way to do it.
To what address?
Well, so a friend of mine who played a show with him and had gotten a letter from him subsequently that had his address on it. And so I was like, can I have that address? And he gave it to me. And so I was going to say in my letter, I got your address from a friend who hope it's okay. But I had and I wrote the letter and I did different versions of it. And I bought special paper for it. And I got some stickers and tchotchkes to put in it. And I addressed it and I put it in an envelope. And then I started thinking like, well, I hope that this is the right address. And I hope that it's not weird. And I hope that he doesn't leave for tour before it gets there. And so maybe I'll just reach out to the woman who manages his stuff, who I'd connected with before, and just ask her, hey, and tell her our idea, and also say, I have this letter I've written. Is it okay if I mail it to him? And her response was, and I'm just going to read it because so I don't misquote. Also, King Tuff told me, our friend Kyle Thomas told me an amazing Jonathan Richman story recently that I kind of wish we could just call him and have him tell it.
Let's do that.
That involved like seeing Jonathan Richman at like a Whole Foods, like talking to two little boys. And yeah.
Well, say that we'll get Kyle on and he can, that could be a regular segment. Do you have any Jonathan Richman stories?
Let's see. Oh, no connection. That's right.
Oh, you can hear. I get you on the Wi-Fi.
Okay.
It reminds me of, I just heard Mark Maron talking about he wanted to get Bob Dylan as his like 1000th episode guest or whatever it was. Yeah. And he really set his mind to it. And he got on the phone with his manager and he said, what do you think the chances are of Bob coming on my 1000th episode? It would be so amazing. I'd love to talk to him. And the manager just went, 0% chance.
Yeah. What are the chances is a great way to start a humble question. So let's see. Here we go.
Yeah.
She's on the Wi-Fi.
No, it's so amazing because I feel like even in this process of essentially having our best laid plans foiled, I have gotten to know him better in a sense. Like I have gotten to know what his value system is, and I don't understand it anymore, but I kind of did set out to learn a little bit more about him, and just hearing these stories and then, I don't know, the complexity of this character and culture is just amazing.
Yeah, totally. So here's what it says. It says, while I personally think this is a good idea, Jonathan never gives his blessings or helps facilitate projects like this. From my experience, he will not want to be a go-between on a project where the focus is on him. And then she goes on to say, fans are always welcome to write Jonathan at this address. Write this down, folks at home. P.O. Box 3959, Chico, California, 95927. If you want to write Jonathan a letter, you're welcome to. He will not want to be a go-between on a project where the focus is on him. And
That's
so he just doesn't want...
I love the idea of being a go-between with yourself or something. It sounds sort of like, it's a go-between.
Because knowing that all of these people, right, everyone, just like Jerry Harrison, anyone we reached out to would have asked him.
Right.
And he, because the focus is him, he would not want to do it.
Yeah. Too stressful.
Yeah.
Too stressful.
And everyone respects him so much because he just feels like someone you want to respect. And, so no one would want to do something that would make him uncomfortable.
Can we have a moment just to talk about this pizza oven building mythology that is clearly a big part of Jonathan's contemporary life?
Oh, totally. So, and the deal is that because when he loves something, he really loves it. When he gets into something, he really gets into it. So this was an interest of his that came up. Wait, let me find the facts
Building
here.
clay pizza ovens, right?
Building, well, stonemason masonry in general. He learned stonemasonry between tours in 1997. 1997 is prime Something About Mary era. This is his biggest moment of public recognition.
Big moment for pizza ovens too. Starting to get into public consciousness. He got an Instagram targeted ad. Next thing you know.
But it's sort of pre all that.
Oh yeah, early adopter.
Yeah, but he got obsessed with it. He started touring less because he loved stonemasonry, and I don't know how early into loving stonemasonry he was like, aha, pizza ovens, but apparently he sort of subsequently specialized in it and does still have a functioning business, presumably in Chico or whatever, actually I looked this up once, and I think it's called Old World Stonemasonry or something like that. I
think it was Jerry's manager who I bumped into who said, my impression is that the music supports the pizza oven building. That's his main priority at the moment.
That's amazing. Come on. That's amazing.
So pure.
I hope to find something like that. And, at that point where you're just like, no, I love this too.
Totally. So let's, as we wrap up this episode, we'll play a little clip of, let's debate if you could pick one Jonathan Richman song. Because there are going to be a lot of people listening to this who do not know this music. If you were going to introduce them with one song, let's all put, see if we can reach consensus.
Back in Your Life, or
so you'd go acoustic, mid-late 70s kind of,
I think so.
Confessional, Back in Your Life, or I Am a Little, Nature's Mosquito, or one of those kind of.
Back in Your Mosquito. Okay. I love Nature's Mosquito, but I'm saying if you want something that, or Hospital, Back in Your Life. I think those are the intro.
But Hospital, where that's Modern Lovers. That's early.
Oh, you're just talking about...
No, I'm saying either. I'm saying, but I'm trying to narrow it down.
I think I don't know. I feel like Back in Your Life, that's what it's called, right?
Yeah. Jenny?
What about 3?
Okay.
We'll have 3 15-second clips on the fade out.
Yes, well, so one Modern Lovers song would be "I'm Straight."
His straight edge anthem. He created straight edge.
He created
basically with
straight
that song.
edge. Yeah, Hippie Johnny, the Hippie Johnny character. I'm Straight. Someone to Hold Me, or or is it Somebody to Hold Me? Yeah. I'm going to just stick with 2. I don't want to go too far down the rabbit hole.
I was thinking the lesbian bar was in Euphoria.
Oh, was it really?
Yeah. Euphoria.
I was dancing in a lesbian bar.
Yeah.
Goldie loves
There's
that
a
song,
scene in
yeah.
Euphoria. I just saw it because I don't know. I just thought I should watch this. And there's a fun scene actually where 3 characters are like just singing and getting ready.
I was dancing a
Lesbian
lesbian
Bar.
bar. Interesting.
So that's another sort of popular thing that happened to him recently.
One of my favorites is an early Modern Lovers song. I think that bridges the two worlds is Girlfriend, because it's so romantic. It's got the raw punk thing of the arrangement, but it's like, I love, he goes, girl, I want a girlfriend. That's GIRLFREN. That's a girlfriend, baby. That's something I understand.
Yeah, that's in my little 3 of the,
Yeah.
and mine are like the,
But
like
I
just
love him,
singing.
and I love like Ice Cream Man. Like I love all the silly. I love when he gets silly, and all the country record is so good.
The country record since she started to
my
ride
God.
about the girlfriend who's more into horses than she is into him.
And the neighbors. Like,
Yeah.
if you leave here in the morning, what will the neighbors tell my wife? It's like, too real.
Oh my God, incredible.
and funny.
Well, Jenny, thank you for joining us, and I'm sure there'll be other fandom adventures that we will pursue.
We
in
can
the
do a
future.
part 2, perhaps.
Yeah, maybe something will come. Maybe something will come out of this.
Maybe
We didn't get his
someday.
permission for this, but
No,
you know
we don't
what?
need his
We can do
permission for
whatever.
this,
Yeah.
but maybe
Yeah.
someday Jonathan will feel differently about it. And that's what I wrote back to her and said, if he ever feels differently about it, let us know, because I get it. And I mean, it does make me almost love him more that he isn't up for this. It's just sort of like, he's just like, no, don't worry about it. Just love my music, and you don't have to make anything.
Totally. Our audience are called the Beautiful Babies. You want to bid them farewell?
Beautiful babies. Where do I look? Is this my
Any way
camera?
you want. Yeah. there's your
Beautiful
camera.
babies. Farewell, beautiful babies. Thanks for having me on Weirder Together.
Together we're weirder together.